Let's speak plainly. For nearly 3,000 years, people have believed that names, real names, hold power. Not the ones we give each other, but the ones hidden, the ones buried, the ones no one dares to speak. Across civilizations, one strange idea kept returning. To know a being's true name is to control it. To speak it out loud is to risk destruction. Kings carved false names into their tombs to confuse the dead. Priests erased the names of traitors to strip them from history. In old grimoires, demons were not summoned with spells, but with names. Just names. So why are we so afraid of calling something by its real name? What do we fear might answer back? Today, we open the oldest curse in history, not carved into stone, not sealed in blood, but whispered in a name. We begin with a lie. A miller, poor and desperate, once claimed that his daughter could spin straw into gold. He told the king, hoping to gain favour. But lies have weight in old stories, and the weight always falls on the innocent. The girl was taken, locked in a cold stone room, straw piled to the ceiling, and only the moonlight to remind her of time. She wept, she begged, she knew no magic, only fear. And just before midnight the door creaked open. A little man entered, strange, hunched, not quite human. He smiled like someone who knew things he shouldn't, and he offered help, of course, but only for a price, first her necklace, then her ring. And finally, when she had nothing left to give, he asked for her firstborn child. Desperate, she agreed. The next day the straw had turned to gold. The king was delighted. He married her. A year passed. The child was born. She had nearly forgotten the deal, until the little man returned. He came for what was his. The queen sobbed, offered him riches, lands, anything but the child. But the little man said no, and then, perhaps moved by pity, or maybe just pride, he offered her a chance. If she could guess his name within 3 days, she could keep the child. She tried every name she knew. She sent messengers across the land, but always wrong. Until the final night, when one of her men returned with a strange report. Deep in the woods, near a fire, a creature was dancing and singing. Tonight I bake, tomorrow I brew, then the queen's child I shall claim too. Lucky is she no one can name, that Rumpelstiltskin is my name. When the little man came again, she spoke the name, and everything changed. He froze, his smile shattered. He screamed, "Who told you?" And then, in a fury of shame and rage, he tore himself in two. That is how the tale ends, at least in the version we remember. But something's always been off. It wasn't love that saved the girl, not courage, not purity, not even magic. It was a word. A single name, not a sword, not a spell, just language. That should have been the clue. Because in this story, the moment of power isn't when gold appears. It's when the name is spoken. The moment he is named, he breaks. So we ask, what if this tale isn't about greed, or magic, or motherhood? What if it's about something far older? About language, and the power to unmake a being with a single sound? In most fairy tales, names are just names, but not here. Here the name is the weapon. And this strange little man, this shadow dancing around a fire, he may be more than a character in a children's story. He may be the echo of something deeper, darker, older than memory, a forgotten god, a trickster spirit, a demon whose power could only be broken the same way it began, with a word, not cast out, not killed, but named. Long before we carved weapons from metal, long before we built walls or raised temples, we had words, and with words came power, not the kind we see in modern stories, no fireballs, no incantations, but something older, sharper, quieter, a kind of power that didn't need to shout. It only needed to be spoken once, across ancient civilizations, from Mesopotamia to Egypt, from the Levant to the Indus Valley. There is one fear that keeps surfacing: to be named, to be truly known, to be bound by the very syllables that define you. In the earliest myths, the greatest curses weren't cast with spells. They were spoken aloud. Names uttered in fury or grief carried consequences. In Sumerian tablets from nearly 3,000 years ago, curses were recorded as lists of names, not actions, not crimes, just names, to call out, to bind, to destroy. To name something was to trap it in a net made of sound. We see it again in the Book of the Dead, the Egyptian guide for the afterlife. The soul must pass through dangerous trials, and the only way to survive is by knowing the names of every god, demon, and gatekeeper it encounters. If you do not know their names, they will not let you pass. Worse, they will devour you. Names weren't labels, they were keys. And if someone else held your key, they held your fate. Even the gods weren't safe. In a tale from ancient Egypt, the goddess Isis wishes to gain power over the sun god Ra. But Ra is the most powerful of all deities, and his true name is hidden. So Isis creates a serpent from the dust of the earth and hides it in Ra's path. The serpent bites him. He writhes in agony. No magic can heal him. No medicine can soothe the pain. Only one thing will work. He must speak his true name. But he resists. He knows the moment he gives it up, he loses control of it. Eventually, he gives in. And from that moment, Isis holds his power. Not by defeating him, not by stealing a weapon, but by making him speak a word. That is the oldest kind of curse. Not a plague, not a wound, but a sound. And it isn't just Egypt. In the Hebrew Bible, names are handled with reverence and caution. The name of God itself is never to be spoken. Only the consonants YH, WH are recorded, because to say it aloud is to risk invoking it. To this day, devout Jews do not say the name. They replace it with Adonai or Hashem, the name. Why? Because somewhere deep in human memory, we believed that names could summon, could command, could curse, and maybe still can. Think of how we use names today. We name storms, we name diseases, we name weapons, and when we want to erase someone from memory, truly erase them, we stop saying their name. It's not enough to kill them. We must unname them. Even in modern times, dictators and tyrants have understood this. They banned the names of enemies. They edited them out of books. They burned documents, because to speak a name is to acknowledge power, and to deny it is to erase existence. So when a name is whispered in a story, when a girl says Rumpelstiltskin and everything shatters, it isn't just a twist in the plot. It's the retelling of an ancient truth, a truth that once ruled kings and gods, a truth we've buried under bedtime stories and fairy tales, but it never went away. It only went quiet, until someone spoke it again. We think gods disappear when people stop believing in them, but that's not always how it worked. Sometimes gods vanished because their names were taken. In ancient Egypt, the pharaohs had 5 names. Each one served a different purpose, some for ceremony, some for war, some for the afterlife. But one name was never spoken aloud, the true name. It was hidden in tombs, carved into stone, concealed behind walls of prayers. Why? Because that name wasn't just identification, it was continuation. If the name survived, the soul endured. But if it was erased, the god died, literally. The ancient Egyptians feared a fate worse than death, erasure. To be forgotten was to be unmade. That's why damnatio memoriae, the punishment of erasing someone's name from history, was so feared. Even the Romans adopted it later. Chisel off the name, strike it from the record, act like they never existed. It wasn't symbolic, it was spiritual murder. In Thebes, archaeologists uncovered temples where names had been carved out of walls, not faces, not statues, just names. As if the soul could be hunted through syllables. And in a way, it could. Names were thought to be threads, woven into the fabric of reality. Pull one, and something unravels. That's why names were guarded, disguised, encrypted. Even gods hid theirs. In Mesopotamia, Enlil, god of air and power, had dozens of titles, but only his priests knew the true name. It was spoken only during the most sacred rituals. In Vedic India, Brahman wasn't just a god. He was the divine principle behind all existence, and the name for him wasn't spoken. It was sung, like a vibration, because sound was closer to truth than words. In the Kabbalah, Jewish mysticism speaks of the 72 names of God, each one a divine formula, a combination of letters that, if spoken with precision, could alter reality. But most people only knew the euphemisms, Adonai, Elohim, Hashem, like layers of clothing wrapped around a body no one dared to touch. Because if you got too close to the real name, you might wake something up. Or worse, it might wake you. And that's the strange paradox. We crave names. We fear them. We protect them. We destroy them. In myth, when someone wants to enslave a spirit, they ask, "What is your name?" In the Testament of Solomon, a mystical text from the early centuries CE, King Solomon is given a magical ring. With it, he commands demons to build the temple in Jerusalem. But how? He doesn't fight them. He doesn't outwit them. He simply asks, "Tell me your name." Once spoken, they are bound. Power didn't lie in strength, it lay in recognition. And maybe that's what ancient cultures feared most, that to be truly known was to be made vulnerable. To be named was to be opened. And once opened, you could be rewritten. Think about how we use names today. We register them, we copyright them, we change them when we flee a country, we tattoo them on our skin, we whisper them when no one's watching, because names are still spells. We just don't call them that anymore. But deep down, we know. Say a name and something stirs. Forget a name and something dies. The Bible tells us that King Solomon was wise, that he built a temple, that he ruled with justice, but that's not the whole story. In the shadows of history, outside the sanctioned texts, there's another version of Solomon. Not just a king, but a magician. A man who commanded spirits, not armies. In a mysterious book known as the Testament of Solomon, written sometime between the 1st and 5th century CE, we see a very different ruler. He's not building a temple with stones, he's building it with demons. The story begins with a boy, a young servant working on the temple. But every night something comes to him in the dark, steals his life, his breath, his blood. Solomon prays, and God sends him a ring, a golden ring, engraved with a seal, the mark of heaven. With it Solomon can command, but not by shouting, not by casting spells, by asking one thing: what is your name? And so, one by one, the demons are brought before him. Beings of fire, shadow, illness, madness. He asks their names. They resist, they scream, they twist in rage, but they answer. And the moment they speak, they are bound. He orders them to cut stone, to transport gold, to dig the foundations of his holy place. Not by chains, not by threats, by language. That's what makes the Testament of Solomon so strange, so powerful. The ring isn't just a magical object, it's a listening device, a translator, a contract. It reveals a truth that terrified the ancient world. That language isn't just sound, it's structure. To know the name of a thing is to understand its limits, its origins and its weakness. It's not a spell, it's a blueprint. That's why Solomon never had to fight. He simply had to ask and listen. This idea of names as tools of control didn't die in obscure texts, it spread. In medieval grimoires like the Key of Solomon and the Lemegeton, magic rituals revolve around one task: identifying the spirit by name, calling it, binding it. Without the name, the spell is useless. With the name, even the most powerful being bends, and it goes deeper. In these texts, the names aren't always names in the way we think of them. There are combinations of letters, symbols, tones, fragments of a sacred language, older than Hebrew, older than Greek. A language not meant to be spoken but intuited, a language of vibration. Some traditions believe that this was the original language of creation, that God didn't build the world with hands but with sound. Let there be light. And there was, not because he willed it, but because he said it. And that brings us back to Solomon, because what he did, what he understood, wasn't just magic. It was naming as mastery. He didn't invent it, he inherited it. From a lineage of priests, scribes and mystics who believed that every being in the universe had a hidden word at its core. Say that word, and the being unravels, or kneels. So when you hear the story of Solomon and the ring, don't picture a king with a shiny toy, picture a man holding a key, not to a door, but to the soul of the world. You've heard the saying, to name something is to own it. It sounds like a proverb, a poetic turn of phrase, but in the ancient world it was law. In nearly every tradition, magical, religious, or oral, naming wasn't just a form of description. It was an act of dominion, because a name wasn't separate from the thing, it was the thing. To say it was to summon it, to hold it, to twist it. In ancient China, Taoist magicians crafted talismanic seals, thin slips of paper or silk covered in strange characters. These weren't prayers, they were names. Each symbol represented a specific spirit, a weather force, a demon, a mountain god. Write the name correctly, and burn it, and the entity would come, not out of devotion, but obligation, because its name had been called. In Babylonian ritual tablets, exorcists recited long lists of demon names, not to plead but to command. The same pattern reappears in medieval Europe, in Icelandic grimoires, in Ethiopian scrolls. Magic wasn't always about belief, it was about pronunciation. The right sequence, the right tone, the true name, and that's where it gets dangerous. Because once a name was known, it could be copied. spoken by someone else, written into another spell, and suddenly the power that once belonged to gods or spirits or ancestors could be wielded by a stranger. That's why names were hidden, masked behind titles, swapped out for riddles, only whispered to the wind, or spoken through dreams. Even in fairy tales we see it. In Rumpelstiltskin, the little man's entire power rests on being nameless. The moment his name is spoken, he loses everything. It's not a plot device, it's a memory. Of a world where names were dangerous knowledge, consider this. Wizards in folklore often refuse to give their names, witches too. Instead they say things like, "I go by many names," or "call me what you will." It sounds mysterious, but it's strategic, because to give your name is to hand over a piece of your essence. And once someone has it, they might not give it back. In Irish myth, the god Lugh hides his true name when dealing with mortals. In Sufi mysticism, the 99 names of God are each said to reveal a part of the divine, but never the whole. In African spiritual traditions, children are often given day names, praise names, or even protective names, to shield their real one until they're older. The name is wrapped in layers, like armour. And if you think that's superstition, consider this. In the modern world, we do the same. We use passwords, usernames, aliases, stage names. We protect our birth certificates. We trademark names like property, because names still mean something, not just to others, but to us. They carry weight, history, expectation. They define who we think we are and who the world thinks we should be. So when a magician from a forgotten culture whispers a name into smoke, or when a medieval priest writes one on a vellum scroll, or when a demon in a story begs you not to say it aloud, they're not guarding a secret, they're guarding themselves. Because to name is to expose, to strip something bare, to pull it into the light, whether it wants to come or not. And once it's there in the open, it is no longer free. Some names were never meant to be spoken, not because they were lost, but because they were forbidden. Across cultures, across centuries, one rule remains strangely consistent. The more powerful the being, the more sacred and dangerous its name. In ancient Egypt, gods had layers of identity. Public names, temple names, secret names. Take Ra, the sun god. He had many titles: creator, lightbringer, father of the skies. But one name sat hidden at the core of his being, his true name, and no one knew it. No one, except Isis. According to a myth preserved in the Chester Beatty papyrus, Isis wanted power over Iridium, not to destroy him, just to match him, to hold the same weight in the cosmos. So she created a serpent out of clay and Ra's own spit, his essence. She placed it in his path. And when it bit him, even the god of the sun could not heal himself. He writhed in agony. Nothing worked, except surrender. He begged Isis for help, and she said, "I will shake you, but first, tell me your name." Ra resisted, but the pain was too great, and eventually he gave it up. The moment he did, Isis took it, and with it, his authority. She became a goddess not through war, not through worship, but through a single whispered word. This isn't a story about poison. It's a story about naming as power transfer. And it didn't just happen in Egypt. In the Hebrew tradition, God has many names: Elohim, El Shaddai, Adonai. But one name is set apart, the Tetragrammaton, YHWH. No vowels, no sound, not to be spoken, not even to be fully written outside sacred texts. To do so was not just disrespectful, it was dangerous. Rabbis taught that the true name of God held cosmic force. To say it was to tamper with the structure of reality. So instead, Jews referred to God as Hashem, the name, as if even naming the fact that a name existed was already too much. In Islam, there are 9 beautiful names of Allah. Each describes a divine attribute: the merciful, the just, the hidden, the ever-living. But these are descriptions, not identity. The true essence of God remains beyond language. In Hinduism, the supreme reality, Brahman, is nameless, unknowable, only approached through vibration. Ayum, a sound, not a word, a resonance that echoes creation, not definition, because the moment you define the divine, you reduce it. So the gods stayed silent, or rather, they made sure we stayed silent. Their names were placed behind veils, guarded by priests, encoded into glyphs, sung only during eclipses or equinoxes, and if spoken by the wrong person at the wrong time, they could vanish, not in a puff of smoke, but in something more terrifying: irrelevance. History is full of gods we no longer know, not because they were killed, but because their names were buried. Think of all the forgotten temples, the statues with worn faces, the chants whose meaning is lost, the rituals once whispered into caves or under stars, now silent. All it took was time and silence, because when a name is no longer spoken, it no longer echoes, and when it no longer echoes, we stop hearing it. And then it's gone, not dead, just unnamed. There are places where names are not spoken but carved, not into paper, but into stone. We call them tombs, but in truth, they are traps. Walk into any ancient burial chamber, Egyptian, Sumerian, Hellenic, and you'll find more than bodies. You'll find words, lists, inscriptions, pleas, threats, and almost always curses. The ancient Egyptians called it Heka, a kind of spiritual force that lived in speech and writing. When they placed a body into the earth, they didn't leave it defenseless. They surrounded it with spells made of names, not to summon, to protect. On the sarcophagus, you'd see the name of the deceased, but not just a label, it was a weapon, because if that name remained intact, the soul could find its way into the afterlife. But if it was scratched out, erased, that soul would wander forever, lost. And so stonecutters became something else, gatekeepers of eternity. A single slip of the chisel could doom a soul, or save it. Some tombs took it further. On the inner walls, priests inscribed curses, but they didn't say go away. They didn't beg for peace. They wrote something like this: "Whosoever enters this tomb and speaks my name with evil in their heart, may their tongue rot in their mouth, may their shadow forget them, may their children call strangers father." These weren't metaphors. They were vocal landmines. And they weren't just Egyptian. In Mesopotamia, tablets buried beneath doorways carried invocations to gods of vengeance, targeting anyone who dared move the stone above. In Anatolia, archaeologists have found cursed tablets nailed to the walls of enemy houses. Some were shaped like people, some folded like letters, all included the name of the target, always the name, because without it the curse was blind, but with it, the curse had teeth. In Rome, Defixiones led cursed tablets were thrown into wells, graves, and sacred springs. Most began with the same phrase, "I bind you," followed by the name of the victim, and then a wish to never win, to never sleep, to never heal, to forget their own name. That last part mattered most, because the ultimate curse was to be unnamed, to exist without anchor, to drift through the world as a shell. Even in medieval Europe this idea survived. Witches were believed to gain power by stealing names, especially of newborns. Midwives tied red threads around infants' wrists, not to bless them, but to protect their identity from being whispered away. You didn't speak a child's real name aloud until they were baptized, or in some cultures, until they could walk, because someone, something might be listening. And if they learned the name, they could take the child, or change them, or replace them. So names became shields, and silence became strategy. Think about that the next time you walk through a museum, when you see a broken plaque, or a faded name etched into stone. It might not be time that wore it down. It might have been deliberate, a way to destroy someone not with fire, but with forgetting. And in that silence, a curse still lingers, not shouted, not cast, just waiting to be read. In the beginning there were no tools, no chisels, no fire, no hands, there were only words. And words, according to some of the oldest stories on Earth, built the world. In the book of Genesis, creation doesn't begin with a hammer or with clay. It begins with a voice. And God said, "Let there be light." And there was light. Not sculpted, not summoned. Second, this idea that language doesn't just describe reality but creates it, lies at the root of many ancient traditions. In Egypt, the god Ptah speaks the world into being through heart and tongue. The heart thinks the idea, the tongue utters the name, and the universe obeys. In Hindu cosmology, the sacred sound Aum isn't a chant, it's the vibration from which all matter urges, a frequency, not a word. In the Gospel of John, we read, "In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God." That's not poetry, it's instruction. Creation is not a physical act. It's a linguistic one, and if speech can build, it can break. That's the other side of the secret. The same mouth that blesses can curse, the same breath that says live can say die. And if naming is a form of creation, then unnaming is a form of destruction. We see this logic in every culture that fears the unsaid and the too much said. In stories of gods who lose power when their names are spoken. In spirits who vanish when identified. In demons who shatter when recognized. In Judaism, the Tetragrammaton, YHWH, is so sacred it is never pronounced. To speak it aloud is to risk cosmic imbalance. To even attempt to vocalize it is to cross a line between reverence and defiance. That's not superstition. That's system design. A name can hold a structure together. Remove it, and the structure collapses. It's not just theology. In the 20th century, linguistic scholars began exploring a theory called the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis, that the language you speak shapes how you think, what you notice, even what you believe to be possible. If a name defines the boundaries of your world, then changing the name changes the world itself. And this is where magic and linguistics begin to blur. When a curse names you, it rewrites your position in reality. It marks you, not with blood, but with definition. And the only way to undo it is to rename yourself, to reclaim the code. That's why so many ancient healing rituals involved saying the name of the illness aloud, dragging it from the shadows into sound, because until it was named, it could not be fought. And that's why so many curses didn't require contact. They only required a name. Once spoken, the damage was already done. Think of how we still talk today. Don't speak of it. If you say it out loud, it might happen. Speak of the devil and he shall appear. Old instincts die hard. We know that words change things. We feel it, even if we can't explain it. A name is more than a handle. It's a slur, and spells are never neutral. They build or they break. Some stories are never written down. They live in whispers, in warnings, in wounds. Tales of people who lost everything, not because of war, or plague, or betrayal, but because of a name. There are folk stories still told in corners of Europe about witches who curse children simply by speaking their names backward. There are lullabies where mothers sing fake names to their babies so that spirits listening nearby won't know who the child truly is. There are African tribal traditions where a newborn is given 3 names, one for the community, one for the ancestors, and one kept secret, known only to the mother, spoken only in moments of danger or love, because to speak it in anger might wound the child's soul, and to have it stolen might never bring them back. In these stories, names aren't just words, they're tethers, fragile lines between spirit and skin. Cut the line and the body stays, but the person is gone. There's an old tale from Northern Europe of a woman who couldn't remember her husband's name after he died. She whispered it every night, hoping it would come back. It didn't. She began to forget other things, his face, his laugh, their home. Eventually even her own name slipped away. She died in silence. And when they buried her, no one knew what to carve on the stone, so they left it blank. Some say she still walks, searching not for him, but for herself, because without a name she has nowhere to go. The horror in these stories isn't the supernatural, it's the erasure. And sometimes the violence comes not from forgetting, but from being renamed. In colonial history, enslaved people were stripped of their birth names, given numbers, Christian names, generic names. The goal wasn't just to categorize, it was to sever. If you take a person's name, you unwrite their past. You unmap their future. It wasn't murder, it was reprogramming. In indigenous cultures, children were taken from their families and renamed at boarding schools, told that their language was wrong, that their identity was shameful. Some of them never heard their real names again. Some didn't recognize them when they did. And still today, survivors carry 2 names inside them, one loud, one lost. Even in psychiatric history, the concept of name amnesia is chilling. Cases exist of people who, after trauma, forgot their names completely, but could remember every other detail of life. They weren't empty. They were unanchored, a person floating without identity, like a book with no title, drifting among shelves no one dares open. And what happens when a name is forced upon someone? In myth, Demons give false names to avoid being bound. But humans too sometimes accept false names to survive. A woman fleeing war uses a different name at every checkpoint. A child in hiding answers to anything but his own. A refugee fills out documents under a name that no one in their family would recognize. Sometimes the body keeps breathing, but the name dies. And so, the curse isn't always cast by others. Sometimes we cast it on ourselves. We bite down. We silence our birth words. We speak what's safe, and our mouths bleed scently. Because to say the real name, the one etched in ash, carved in memory, whispered by the soul, might be too dangerous, or too painful, or too powerful, and maybe that's the greatest curse of all, not losing your name, but knowing it, and not being allowed to seek it. There are stories we inherit without knowing, not written, not taught, just absorbed. Like the way we lower our voice when speaking of the dead, or the way we hesitate before saying something sacred, or the way we flinch at the sound of our own name spoken sharply, like a knife drawn in the dark. Somewhere inside us, we still believe that names are more than sounds. We feel it in our bones, even if we no longer remember why. Across 200 years, through gods and graves, curses and kingdoms, one thread has remained unbroken. Language is not mountainous, neutral, and names are not safe. They shape the world, they bind, they bless, they break. In some cultures, to know your true name is a sign of spiritual maturity. In others, it's something you discover only at death, a secret word spoken only once, before you leave the world and dissolve into something larger. Maybe that's why fairy tales still end with names. Say my name. Guess my name. Dim. Call me yours. Because the final power is not in magic. It's in recognition. To speak a name is to say, I see you, you exist, you are real to me, and that is the closest thing we have to resurrection. So what do we do in a world that's forgotten this? A world where names are bought, sold, trademarked, deleted? Where we rename cities, rewrite histories, erase the unwanted? I think the answer is simple. We remember. We remember that naming is sacred, that it's a privilege, not a transaction, that to be called something truly called is to be seen, and that to lose your name through violence, through silence, through shame is to begin unraveling, not just in memory, but in meaning. As the narrator of this story, I've spent a long time sitting with these questions, longer than I care to admit, and the truth is, this isn't just a documentary about forgotten rituals or buried gods, it's a story about me. And maybe about you. Because I've had names I don't speak anymore, names I let go of, names that were taken from me. Some I gave up willingly, some I was never given the choice. But I remember them. And sometimes, later at night, I still whisper them, just to make sure they're still there. Because even if the world forgets, I don't want to. And maybe that's the oldest magic we still have. Not power, not control, but remembrance. To say the name, even in a whisper, even in the dark, even when no one's listening, especially then, because maybe the gods didn't disappear, maybe the demons didn't die, maybe they're just waiting for Onegresus, for someone to call them back.